Okay, we're going to start the second session. We've got Piers Thompson and Yuxi Zhao. If you're ready, if you'd like to share the slides, you're going to talk about evolution of entrepreneurial ecosystem in deprived areas.
Hello, thank you very much, Fumi. I hope everybody can see the slides. This isn't about a particular paper that we've done. It's a mix of different bits of work that we've touched on recently. I'm Piers Thompson, and I'll be starting off, and then Ushi's going to join in and give the more interesting part of the presentation. Now, we wanted to have a look at entrepreneurial ecosystems in deprived areas because there's a growing recognition that the vast majority of the literature is focused in on high-tech enterprises, innovative enterprises, those cities or regions or that are more successful, that are generating higher values businesses, but these might not necessarily be applicable to the more deprived areas of countries where the aims of any kind of enterprise support that's being put in place is often to try and provide secure employment that has reasonable levels of wages, rather than there will be a great desire if they could create these high-tech businesses, but they might not necessarily benefit the local population, and there might be different targets in place. So this means that some of the traditional measures of growth that might be sought aren't really applicable, and that it may be a slightly different kind of objective that should be targeted, but also at the same time, some of the difficulties faced might be different. The barriers in place might be slightly different and need to be overcome in slightly different ways, and the support that's present might also differ. In terms of work that we've done, I originally did some work on deprivation and entrepreneurship in Wales when I worked on the GEM project quite a long time ago now. I produced a paper which at conferences was titled Entrepreneurship and the Domains of Deprivation, which my boss at the time suggested implied I was trying to write a Harry Potter novel rather than an academic paper. But this was one of the first kind of looks at deprivation entrepreneurship I did. More recently, myself and Ushi have been doing a little bit of work for Portsmouth and Essex Accelerating Women's Entrepreneurship project, where we were looking at disadvantaged groups or areas where there's disadvantage, looking at female entrepreneurs who've got additional disadvantage. And we looked at some aspects in terms of the barriers that were faced, but also had a look at the impact that the culture present and how that interacted with the personalities might affect it. The last area of research I can't really claim any credit for because it is Ushi's PhD, which she'll talk about in a little bit, where she's been concentrating on generating entrepreneurial intention and the role that human capital plays within that in deprived areas. So she's been looking at a lot of the barriers that affect that, and she'll give a bit more detail. In terms of the Accelerating Women's Entrepreneurship work we did, as I mentioned, we looked at some of the barriers to success that were present. We used a longitudinal small business survey to see which of the perceived barriers were being identified, and we looked to see if different disadvantage was affecting those particular barriers. In particular, after controlling for other business characteristics, we looked at whether the business was located in one of the 15% most deprived neighborhoods using the multiple deprivation index. We also looked if it was an ethnic minority-led business, whether that had an impact. Given that the barriers were self-assessed, as whether they were affecting their success. We also incorporated some measures based on promotion and prevention focus to see if the businesses were looking for gains or if it was more about security, as that might affect what they were trying to achieve. In terms of the results that we found that in terms of obtaining finance, it was the female-led businesses within deprived areas that were identifying this more frequently as a barrier. And we also found that perhaps particular to these kinds of deprived area businesses, it was the living wage or minimum wage regulations which were causing difficulties in achieving success, reflecting in part the nature of those businesses, but because we had controlled for the sectors and the size of the businesses, it was an additional effect on top, implying that there is particular problems that are faced that the support available might need to kind of consider and overcome. So I'll pass over to Yuxi now, and she will give a bit more insight in terms of her PhD work. So I'll move it on to her first slide. You there, Yuxi?
Yeah, thank you, Piers. Hello, everyone. My PhD research focuses on human capital and entrepreneurial intention in UK deprived areas and creates a new entrepreneurial intention model, particularly emphasizing deprived areas. So the existing literature either looks at deprived neighborhood, restrict human capital, or limited human capital, decrease entrepreneurial intention. So my research combines two research streams and examines different bi-directional relationships between three aspects. So as slides of dashes indicated, the influence of neighborhood context on human capital in turn affects the local context. And the influence of relating factors on entrepreneurial intention reversely affect local context and the human capital in deprived areas. And based on the competitive advantage of the inner city proposed by Michael Porter, targeting the enterprise gap is regarded as a way to address deprivation. But the question is, does the gap only exist for enterprises in deprived areas? My research found the barriers to entrepreneurship in deprived areas not only relates to the availability of external support or individuals' capabilities, but also link with the accumulated gaps happened throughout their growing process. Piers, please go to the next slide. Thank you. Yes, please go to your next slide. Thank you.
I'm trying, Yuxi, it's stuck.
Yeah. Or should I carry on?
You carry on talking, I'll see if I can get it to move.
Okay, so in terms of key findings, imitation is found to be a driver facilitating entrepreneurial motivation in deprived areas. Imitating others, particularly those successful local business, is a safer way to get income or get rid of unemployment. This is based on an economy dominated by necessity-based entrepreneurship. The deprived context not only negatively influences human capital, but also negatively affects people's psychological construction and behavioral norms. So people usually have low levels of self-esteem or confidence. They are reluctant to look for external support, such as finance and business support programs offered by the governments or supportive institutions. And in this situation, my research also found a polarization phenomenon in deprived areas. In the positive spectrum, it's found a part of people perceive the specific human capital is more important to facilitate entrepreneurial intention. It could be compared to the investments in general human capital that depends on other institutional and geographical factors. People can choose to use self-help methods. For example, like self-learning from online search or learning by doing, and the mutual support from the local or personal ties to obtain specific human capital. But it doesn't mean the general human capital is not important. The problem is people cannot choose the better condition to obtain general human capital. But the knowledge obtained from these self-help methods cannot provide specific experience or enough confidence for the business. This explains homogeneous business types and the selection of easy-to-enter sectors in deprived areas, because a lack of human capital makes them hold prevention attitudes towards certain business activities. For example, exporting activities or growing sales, restricting the business nature to a large extent in such areas. And in the negative spectrum, people are completely isolated from the mainstream society and deeply embedded in the vicious circle of deprived local context. They are not active in the labor market. They lost trust for the outside environments, and the stronger local network increased the possibility of illegal activities and informal economy, further ruining the local reputation and hindering the external business investment. Briefly, the population in the negative spectrum is consistently stuck in the vicious circle among neighborhood context, human capital, and entrepreneurship, also simultaneously affecting those people in the positive spectrum. Piers, please go to your next slide. Thank you. This new model demonstrates opportunity can be perceived from a deprived neighborhood context and stimulates entrepreneurial motivation. And the influence of human capital on entrepreneurial intention is mediated by individuals' confidence and the capability of setting goals in spite of adversity. Most importantly, intertwined relationships in this new model expose the government's superficial understanding about issues in deprived areas and explore the possible reasons to explain why the outcome of providing support or programs is not consistent with policymakers' initial expectations. Piers, next slide, thank you. So to sum up, there is a unique entrepreneurial ecosystem in deprived areas. For the female entrepreneurship, culture and personality are two major variables hindering the entrepreneurial engagement. But unsupportive entrepreneurial ecosystem still provides opportunities for those people who are suited to it. For example, through mutual support or using alternatives to solve problems. Overall, a lower entrepreneurship level in deprived areas is not an outcome separately caused by a few factors at a specific time point. It's an outcome of accumulative, even generational vicious circles throughout individuals' cognitive, psychological, behavioral, educational, and occupational development, ultimately reflecting in entrepreneurial intention and behaviors. For the female entrepreneurs in deprived areas, particular policies are required to specifically emphasize this doubly disadvantaged group. This is our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Yuxi and Piers. That was really interesting and really rich thoughts. Would anyone like to kick off? Right, so just kind of very basic question, if I could sort of start off. So Yuxi's PhD was looking specifically at female entrepreneurs in deprived areas in the UK, right? So yeah. Is it kind of urban deprived area, or kind of could you just give a little bit more context of how you sort of identify deprived areas?
It's multiple deprivation that's based on the 7 domains. It's not only about poverty, so it's like education, income, health, crime, that's 7 domains.
Okay, right. Okay, oh, I see the hand up. Hind?
So thank you for the presentation, and I find it very, very interesting and very relevant to the study I'm working on with the supervision of Professor Christina Theodoraki about the entrepreneurial in economic emerging context. And here I would like to ask about you spoke about the human capital and how it shapes the entrepreneurial intention within an ecosystem setting. My question here is, you spoke also about the entrepreneurial motivation. My question is about, is it related to what we call the entrepreneurship or orientation, or is something completely different?
Okay, thank you for your questions. So actually my PhD research looks at the entrepreneurial process, including entrepreneurial motivation, intention, and behaviors. And also my research distinguish motivation from intention. So the motivation is just an emotional reaction. It's like people want to set up business, but they may not carry out the subsequent business preparation. So it's just like an idea, the initial thoughts. And the intention is more closely to behaviors. It's like they are going to do some marketing research or find some people, talk about this idea and do some preparation. And so the intention is more close to behavior. But okay. These three stages are related.
Okay, perfect. Relating to the process as well, through the entrepreneurial intention.
Sorry?
Related to the entrepreneurial intention through the process of entrepreneurship as well.
Yeah, it's the intention is the central focus, but still can find the different factors influencing motivation and intention respectively to find the difference.
Okay, thank you very much and congratulations on the very interesting and impactful subject.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, maybe I will step in because I raised the hand as well. Thank you, Piers and Yuxi, for the presentation. It was very interesting, especially as these deprived areas, they usually don't get too much mention in the literature, as we focus on Silicon Valleys and the likes. Could you just tell me what would you advise to the policymakers in those areas? What could they do in terms of policies to help reshape these conditions?
Okay, Piers, I answer the question first, and you do. Okay, so generally the entrepreneurship in deprived areas, I think people's mental psychological construction is very important because they just even there is a service or programs provided to improve their business skills or fill in the gap. But my research found the problem is they don't want to engage in this support. So they lost the trust, and because the lower self-esteem or confidence, and which facilitates their independence in the local context, and also lower self-esteem results in their lower expectations for themselves or their business. So maybe they don't want to further improve. They just getting by rather than getting on. And particularly for the female entrepreneurship, and so it's similar to the entrepreneurs in deprived areas. It's like additional trainings or financial support will not help overcome the barriers associated with like the child care or marriage life. So the suggestion is the spatial deprivation needs a close look at local community structures to understand its impact on female entrepreneurs. That's my perspectives, and see whether Piers want to add.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think I can add a great deal more to what Yuxi said. I think one thing that I would say that policymakers probably should do, and they almost inevitably don't do, is that there ought to be a degree of consistency in whatever approach that they take, and give time for policies to actually have an effect. I think that's, the things that generally cause a problem is that whatever policies are come up with, whether they would work or not, an inevitable political cycle takes place and resources are reallocated and you don't get the success that you would get from it. So I'm not going to disagree with what Yuxi's said and suggested about the difficulties and all of this. And I think the other thing that perhaps needs to be taken into account is, of course, there has to be some care about whether you are going to use resources productively and whether more entrepreneurship necessarily is better entrepreneurship. But as I say, I think the key thing would be the consistency of whatever policies you approach and adopt for at least a period of time to see if it works, and adapt it from there rather than throwing it all away, ripping it all up and starting again.
Any other questions or comments, or anyone who's done research with related topics would like to comment on? Oleg?
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Because my connection is not good here. Yeah, I was wondering with regard to this presentation, this connection between psychology and deprivation. How do you think it's generalizable across different contexts? So is it specific to the UK? I mean, given its cultural economy, political economy, or is it something that we can generalize in terms of, for example, China, India, other places?
I think that given the studies that have looked at entrepreneurship and in particular kind of old industrial areas, there are studies finding commonalities between, say, countries such as the UK, parts of the US, other places within Europe, Germany. The limitations on some of the kind of the broader studies in being able to look at the impact that psychology has across the patterns over kind of different areas is probably limitations in the data that's available to some extent, which mean that although there's beginning to be an evidence base, to what extent it would apply to, going back to one of the questions that was asked earlier about emerging country context or developing country context, I don't think we can quite be sure there, but we are beginning to see evidence that mechanisms like self-selecting migration and some of the conditions that are created do seem to lead to a kind of similar pattern appearing within countries that are perhaps similar. So not necessarily UK only, but to what extent we could say it's applied across a broader range of countries, I think there probably would need to be more work. I don't know if Yuxi has anything to add.
No, because my research only look at UK deprived areas so far.
Okay, anyone else has got a question or comment? So do you have any sort of plan for sort of next sort of research, Yuxi, building on what you've done?
Yeah, because for my research, particularly look at deprived areas, and it's really hard to get the primary data. So limited PhD time, I just collect the data from Nottingham and the deprived areas of Nottingham. So my future research will expand the sample size in other deprived cities in the UK to test the results.
Brilliant. So I think the timing wise we are doing well. So thank you very much to Piers and Yuxi for the great double acting, and thank you for the discussions.